Morning. Today is Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearing. We have 6 cases on the agenda. 5 board members are present, 4 physically present, and Mr. Lawson is virtual. Mr. Yates and Mr. Hoffman are absent today. The first case on the agenda is RPC 15058-016, on Wilson Boulevard. The appellant has asked to withdraw this case. I assume, Ms. Shuttlesworth, you don't have any objection.
No objections.
Okay, I'll move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Mendez, a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is unanimous. That case is withdrawn. The second case is RPC 1802402A at 2250 Clarendon Boulevard. This has also been asked to withdraw. Any objections, Ms. Shuttlesworth?
No objections.
Okay, I'll move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Matskin, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. That is withdrawn as well. Okay, do we have Mr. Yanoni and Ms. Roskin? Turn your cameras on. At the bottom. Ms. McCraw, are you here for the appellant?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, next case on the agenda is RPC 1700501 1530 Clarendon Boulevard. Ms. McCraw, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Thank you very much and good morning. I would point the board to page 53 of 137 of the BOE memo. This is really where the bulk of our appeal issues come into play. The subject property, which is built in 2013, is a Class A apartment building located in the Roslyn submarket of Arlington, kind of the western side of it. It contains 474 total units, 55 of which are affordable, and has 10,625 square feet of rentable retail commercial space and 433 parking spaces. We use an income approach similar to the assessor, and this can be found as previously mentioned on page 53 of 137. So just to quickly summarize here, we just have a few points here. We've adjusted the other income based on year-end 2023 actuals. We've increased the expenses here to $9,750 per unit, again, to align with year-end 2023 actuals. And then we also make a deduction for business personal property. But the real reason that we're here today, I understand that Lori in her revisions and in her test column has come to a different NOI argument upon review, which we appreciate. The real crux of our appeal issue here and the reason why we're here today is due to the cap rate. The assessor in the guidelines uses a base cap rate of 4.06% before loading with the tax rate and reserves, which is far too low based on actual market data as well as sales in the Arlington submarket. The apartment market has seen rising cap rates for 2 years now. Since March of 2022, the Fed has hiked interest rates by 550 basis points, which had an effect on the cap rates. I would point the board to page, starting on page 56 of 137. This is kind of a summary of how we derived our cap rate. We've used a base cap rate of 5% here, and this is purely through surveys. I would want to point the board to the bottom here where we have PwC Corpaz. As you can see at the very bottom highlighted, the average apartment multifamily cap rate was 5.43% with a range of 4.25 to 6.50%. This is an increase of about 45 basis points from fourth quarter 2022 and around 85 basis points from fourth quarter 2021. The national apartment market just above, the average cap rate is 5.59% with a range of 4 to 8%. But we'd like to focus on the Mid-Atlantic region apartment market. RERC indicates even higher cap rates for the Washington, D.C. only area, around 5.6 or 6%. And this just shows that from last year to this year, cap rates have increased pretty significantly year over year. And the Arlington Assessment Office has only increased the base cap rate for this property by around 10 basis points. It's the base cap rate of 4.06 that Arlington uses is below even the range of the Mid-Atlantic region apartment market, which begins at the low end of 4.25%. And I know that Arlington has guidebooks. They use sales to kind of indicate the cap rates that they use in their guidelines. And if that's the case, right at the top of the page, we have two sales that indicate cap rates in the 5.5% to 6% range. Jasper Columbia Pike, which sold July of 2023, has a confirmed cap rate of 5.5%, as well as the Point Falls Church, which closed in February of this year, but was under contract in December of 2023. This indicates a cap rate of 5.5% using the trailing 12 and using a pro forma of 6%. I also want to note that these two sales, the assessment to sales ratio here for Jasper Columbia Pike, the assessment was 112% of the sales price. And for the Point Falls Church, the assessment was 119% of the sales price. Now we know that, Arlington is fair and will look at the actual income, make adjustments there. So you might be wondering why are these assessments so off from the sales price? Well, the answer is with the cap rate. The cap rates that the assessor is using is just far too low compared to the actual market and the actual sales. And that's in turn causing these assessments to be well above the sales prices that we are seeing. And finally, I just want to, as an example, if you were to take in the test column that the assessor has put forward, their revised NOI based on a review of the actual financials that were submitted upon appeal, if you're even just to use the base cap rate that as is the lowest end of the range of the PwC fourth quarter 2023 Mid-Atlantic region apartment market, the low end of that range is a base cap rate of 4.25%. If you were to use that with the tax rate and reserves, same NOI as the assessor has derived in their test column again, and you capitalize that, you would reach an indicated value of $190,299,500, which is pretty much in line with the assessment from tax year 2023. It's our position that due to the rising cap rates in the market, this property should not have increased as much as it has this year. If anything, it should have stayed fairly similar to last year. And again, the major difference here is in the cap rate. If you were to be very conservative with the low end of the range, you would reach an indicated value that is just in line with tax year 2023. So we kindly ask the board to consider the market sales in Arlington in particular, as well as the investor surveys, which indicate at least a 50 basis point increase in the cap rate. As a reminder, Arlington only increased cap rates around 10 basis points to bring this assessment down. So with that, I thank you and I rest here.
Great, thank you. Ms. Roskin for the county, please.
Thank you, board. Thank you, Ms. McCraw. Once again, I did not inspect this property. It was inspected last year. I believe it was by Anetta, but it was inspected recently. After reviewing the income and expense statements that were submitted and the rent rolls, obviously this is where the two test columns come into play here. I tested both of those out, and as you can see with the test column, we came up with something a little bit different for the rents. I lowered rents for the retail and stuff, but I actually used a little bit less rents than what show for apartments on the rent roll. When you take a look at as another comparison, the January 1 combined NOI, which is that center column between columns D1 and D2, if you look at the NOI, it's less than what's being reported for the operating year 2023. And Ms. McCraw brings up the cap rate. Our cap rates are well supported by sales that were submitted in our guidelines. As for, switch pages here. There are ample sales that support the subject's price per unit rate of $399,000 per unit. There's ample sales that support that. We feel that our cap rate is well supported. If Mr. Chikas wants to make a comment on the Jasper sale, I open the mic to him. But otherwise, we feel that our January 1 assessment is well supported.
Yes, if I can, just a minute, even before we get to the cap rates, which we've talked about quite a bit this year, to refocus upon the summary sheets, please note that the county was approximately $900,000 under projecting what was achieved for gross potential, just shy of $1 million under projection for what was achieved for effective gross. Even with, again, a bit of a under projection on operating expenses, we were still over $260,000 under what was achieved for NOI at the property. Again, a year in growth in all categories, top to bottom. Going back to the cap rates again, I think we've talked a good bit about the difference between Jasper Sale and South Arlington on Columbia Pike, non-metro adjacent to this property, which is less than half a mile from Roslyn Metro. Again, much more superior location would be the idea as far as from an investor standpoint. Again, talking about the cap rate support that we provided over the year, PricewaterhouseCoopers third quarter range was from 3.75 to 8. As Ms. McGraw noted, the third quarter for Mid-Atlantic did jump up a bit, about 50 basis points, but was still at 4.25 to 6.5. Again, we're in that range that's been provided. We don't have access to fourth quarter reports, et cetera. So, looking at the income stream, I think the assessment is highly supportable. And again, given that the information that we've used all year in regards to the cap rate information we had at the time of the valuation, again, as Ms. Ruskin stated, we do believe that the county should be confirmed. Value of $194,659,500. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Metzger.
I have a question for the department, maybe a couple of questions. Is it true that committed affordable residences have a different vacancy guideline and cap rate guideline than
Yes.
Market? Yeah, yes. Okay, great. How come you didn't split them out anywhere on the I&E summary? Because it's not a trivial amount. It's not 2 or 3 units. It's 55. It's a lot of units. Good percentage of the building. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The summary page is meant to be condensed. And as you can see, it's a crazy wide page with a lot of columns. If you want to find the breakdown, go to the test worksheet, which is the following page, and you will see where the committed affordable rents, the vacancy, and the cap rate is separate from the market valuation.
And then you lumped them on the summary. That's great. That's the answer I was hoping for. And one other question for you, Ms. Roskin. Now, you mentioned about ample sales twice that support your cap rate range. We know about the Jasper. The appellant mentioned a sale not in Arlington. Are there any other sales, or were you depending more on Pricewaterhouse and other pundits?
Well, it turns out there's a sale that's in Roslyn where it sold for $545,000 per unit. The subject is $399,000.
This is during the evaluation period?
Yes,
Okay.
no, I take that back. My apologies. That's
Too early.
2022.
Yeah,
Yeah, but that's Roslyn. Um, let's see, 2023. I'm gonna have to let Chris make a comment on that, but the cap rates are still well supported.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in Ms. Ruskin's mouth that she may have spoken with a bit of exuberance.
so it's by the big survey.
Yeah, the sales are a bit limited,
And
but
then-
again. the
Yeah, and
surveys
there's
do
a couple of
support us.
them that you look at, not just one. Okay, thank you.
Questions? Ms. Roskin, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. Once again, we reviewed the income expense statements, the rent rolls, and we feel that the January 1 assessment is well supported. As you can see, once again, our NOI for the January 1 is less than what's being reported for the 2023. And when I tested it out, it's still less than the 2023 INE. Thank you.
And Ms. McCrawford, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. I first want to point out that the second sale I mentioned, it's called the Point at Falls Church, but it is in Arlington County. So those cap rates confirmed 5.5 and 5.5%. I want to note that in our pro forma, we actually used a base cap rate of 5%, so much lower. But the basic logic here is that given the cap rate expansion and lowering value here, the assessment should have stayed flat at best. And understandably, the department has limited data at the time of creating these assessments, but in the face of new information, we would hope that changes would be made here. And I would, again, just like to emphasize that if you just use the bottom of the range of the PwC Corp has fourth quarter 2023 cap rate range of 4.25%, using, again, Lori's revised test column NOIs, not changing anything, you would reach an indicated value of $190,299,500, which is right in line with last year's tax year 2023 indicated value.
Thank you. Your
Thank
time
you.
is up. Thank you. Okay, it's just among the board. Where are votes? Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, we've heard the cap rate argument all year. And when, we feel it's appropriate to adjust the cap rate, I think we do. But in this case, I mean, it looks like the GPI that was reported has been higher than all the past years. Of course, that doesn't make the total assessment, but it looks like they're bringing in more over the history of the property, and it's only up 2.2%. So I'm okay with the current assessment.
But that it marginally increases each year, and this assessment is a marginal increase well within the range. I'm saying what Johnny's saying, but a little bit differently. It's well within the range that we see other appellants. I think it's too high. So this is a quality property. To me, this is, given the constant and consistent responses from the department and how they arrive at cap rates, I see no successful argument.
Mr. Lawson, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I wanted to share. There's an advice column that Eli Tucker writes in Oral Now, and here's what he says: "I have preached for years the importance of caution and care when applying real estate data to your own decision making. National real estate data is rarely useful. Regional real estate data is sometimes useful. Local data can be full of misleading conclusions." And I think probably the strongest residential market in the country is Arlington. I had previously pushed that there should be a modest increase in cap rate due to how interest rates have risen. However, the board did not go along with that. So I'm also good with the assessment.
I'll move it.
Somebody want to make a motion?
Sure. I'll move that we confirm the county's current assessment at $194,659,500.
And a second, Mr. Metzger, all
Try to
in
be
favor?
quick.
Aye, opposed. Okay, it's unanimous. The county is confirmed at 194,659,500.
Thank you,
Thank you.
board.
Okay,
Thank you.
District Pro, are you staying on for the last four? No, she's gone off.
No, those are Armin's.
Okay,
Good morning.
morning, Mr. Yanani. Okay, and we have Mr. Chicas. Okay, RPC for the fourth case is 34020002, 2511 Richmond Highway. Mr. Yanani, you can start with your 8 minutes to tell us about this property.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Armin Yanoni, agent for the owner of Ryan LLC. The subject property we're discussing now is a Class A office building. It's located in National Landing by the airport. It was built in 1968 with an effective age of 1990 and has roughly 345,000 square feet of leasable area. The county's test sheet is on page 3 of 146 of the BOE memo. And I would just like to point out a few facts about the subject property as we run through those inputs. So the property was 13% vacant as of the date of valuation, which, looks good at the face. However, the issue with this property and many others in the market and ones that we'll be discussing today is near-term lease rollover. The property has 28,000 square feet coming vacant in the calendar year of 2024, which was confirmed as of the time of filing and the date of valuation, which equates to a confirmed 21.2% expected physical vacancy as of 1/1/24. This does not include one tenant, which was expected to downsize and was not accounted for, in a numerical sense. However, there is an additional tenant expected to downsize. Additionally, there is one tenant receiving a significant 50% rent abatement, which you can see on the open year 2023 concessions, which totaled about $640,000 in loss. And additionally, there are another 18,000 square feet of leases expiring in 2025, where again, the current market, it's expected to demand, tenants are expected to demand concessions and like free rent, tenant improvements, et cetera, especially on an aging property like this. So there's, significant vacancy risk at this property. And, despite this, the county on their test column, we can see that the vacancy was not changed from 18% on the original assessment, which we found pretty surprising. And not only that, but the office rents were increased from $33.50 to $36 on the occupied office, which we found to be pretty shocking given the the condition of the property and the condition of the market at this time. So we would like the board to consider the vacancy issue at this property. The rent roll is on page 5 of 146, and you can see there are many 2024 expirations on there, not just the ones highlighted in red, as well as the significant 2025 expirations, which a buyer will account for as of the date of valuation. And while it's not, physically vacant as of 1/1/24, it still should be treated as a significant risk at the property. The other reason we're here today, of course, is the cap rates. And, while we strongly disagree with the county's cap rates, we believe that the cap rate study conducted for the county and the conclusions were made were highly flawed. They relied on sales that, frankly, were based on some of which were DC, Wisconsin Avenue sales. One of the market, the Microsoft building, and really the only good sale that was included in that study was 1776 Wilson, which was a 7.4% cap rate. However, we understand the board isn't going to pick new stabilized cap rates here today for the county. And I think that the biggest flaw in the county assessment model for cap rates is there's a lack of allowance for property specific adjustments based on upcoming vacancy, upcoming capital expense, and other risks that buyers would account for as the date of valuation. So while we don't expect the board to, select a brand new cap rate for a stabilized, well-performing property in the market, we would ask their consideration in making adjustments to the county stabilized cap rates, as there is risk to be accounted for that the buyer would either include in their stabilized vacancy or deduct below the line. The way we've accounted for this is increasing our vacancy to 25% and using our 8 base cap rate, as well as deducting the capital expenses upcoming budgeted of $1.6 million below the line. It is worth noting, the 2023 income and expense is healthy, and the county isn't far off on the income piece. And I think really what a lot of this comes down to is making an adjustment for the risk of the near-term rollover, and as well as the fact that, you know, many of the current rents in the building are not going to hold on renewals. And even if the face rents hold, there's going to be significant concessions, as we've seen time and time again in the market. And we've included many articles in our submission to, you know, support these concessions. So again, you know, we're coming in at a value of about 63.5 million. And this is kind of taking, you know, everything we can into account in terms of the risk and using a cap rate that's much higher than the counties. We don't necessarily expect the board to, you know, come back at that value. However, we would really appreciate a consideration again to the stabilized vacancy being 18% when we have 21.2% expected physical vacancy of the date of valuation. And then additionally, the cap rate, as you know, with this near-term rollover, you know, this property would not necessarily receive the same cap rate in the market as a 1/124 as a property with, you know, 10-year lease terms and, you know, no significant rollovers that might be in a better leasing position. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chicas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Mr. Iannone. Speaking primarily upon the summary sheet, you can see looking at the original projections in 2024, January 1 versus what was received with the appeal, the operating year 2023. Again, while there was a indication of an increase for projections for gross potential, the effective gross was under projected by almost $1 million, $974,000. Even while under projecting operating expenses, which we point out were the highest reported over the last 4 years, we still under projected NOI at $562,000. Again, please note that this column, 2023 column E, is actual. So this is before even being grossed up or shy of what was achieved by $500,000. You know, in regards to what Mr. Iannone spoke about, please understand that a lot of the words he was talking about were anticipation, expectation, things that will occur in the future. As of the date of value, we rely upon the rent roll that was in place. Obviously, even using his own words, it performed fairly heartily, considering what was reported for the year 2023. Please note as well that this is still, even after a under projection, this is still a revision downwards of 15% year over year. So while we're asking for confirmation of our original assessment, please do note that compared to last year's assessment, the department absolutely took into account the state of the market. And again, while there is ad nauseum talk about cap rates, please note that a 15% decrease year over year should be considered as part of this. That being said, based on under projections, over $500,000 of NOI that was achieved, we do believe that the county should be confirmed at a value of $91,891,700. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members?
Yeah, for the county, in column E, where the actuals were reported, I didn't see any for vacant office space. And sometimes when that happens, I see the county reconstructing that. Why didn't they reconstruct this time?
It actually made our case a little bit stronger in the sense that showing the actuals, we were still under projected top to bottom. We do have an associate, Mr. Peralta, who generally will make adjustments to account for that. You can see we did account for that in our test column F, but as far as recreating their column E, we did not.
Mr. Maskin.
A question, excuse me, question for the department. On column E, vacant office, and right below it, no, I guess just vacant office. I'm sorry, column F. I said E. I meant F. The vacant, following this. Yeah, the office space goes up, 10-15% from anything they've ever achieved before per square foot. What's the rationale behind that? From 32 plus to $36 a square foot.
It's based upon the rent roll that's in place. If you look at page
You're saying the column E.
Yeah,
Office
if you look at
rent is-
page, if you look
Go
at
ahead.
page 5 of 147, you'll see the rent roll listed. And underneath the total for the office space, you can see the math that's involved, which is essentially the square footage divided by the income, and that gives you a perspective per square foot rate.
Well, but that is significantly different from what you have in column E, the report from the owner. Just
That is
Go ahead.
correct. So in that case, the math is taking the office divided by the NLA.
just a different way to go about it. So
Exactly.
because I see the vacancy is different in those two columns and all
Exactly.
kinds of stuff. Oh, boy. All right. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question, Mr. Chikas. In the test, I see you lumped in the below the line deductions to the 2.3 million.
Yes, ma'am. That is indicated vis-a-vis the square footage vacant at time of valuation based upon the information received indicated that there would be a below the line deduction.
Okay, but why wasn't that done on the original assessment?
That unfortunately I can't speak to. I didn't perform the original assessment, but
Problem, okay. Any other questions? I just got comments. All right, Mr. Chikas, have you taken?
No, can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Hold on 1 second.
Thank you.
Mr. Metzger.
Thank you. Going back to Mary's question, Mr. Chikas, in column F, standard 18% vacancy rate, and then below the line. Don't we usually go below the line at vacancy in excess of 28% for office spaces?
no, essentially it's a formula of math whereby the amount of square footage vacant as of January 1st would be divided by the NLA. That would develop a percentage of vacancy, and then within the range that the the department provides as far as their guidelines, would make an adjustment. If there's a indicated square footage above what is allowed, quote unquote, then that a number would be used for the test as far as or below the line deductions.
So what was the first sentence you divide in the NLA, by vacancy? What was that percentage as of 1/1/24?
I believe the appraiser used. It looks like it was 13.3%.
No, it's 18% plus below the line. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, ma'am. So again, looking at the original column D as compared to what was received with the actuals for operating year 2023, you can see while a bit over projection for gross potential, again, almost $1 million under projection for effective gross. And the subsequent over $560,000 under projection for NOI. Again, based upon the actuals that were reported vis-a-vis versus the projected gross for the county in column D, we do believe that supports our original assessment of $91,891,700, which again is a 15% drop in value year over year. Much more in line with the achievement at the property as opposed to the appellant's request for a negative 41% drop in value. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Iannone, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Thank you. I would like to point out that the rent roll on page 135 that the county mentioned they relied upon does confirm the vacancies upcoming, which total over 21% of the physical space in the building, yet they only use 18%. Not to mention an average over the 5 years of $2 million in concessions since 2019 every year for leasing. Additionally, the top floor has been posted for sublease at $32 a foot. And I'd like to mention that the anticipation of fair market value, or the principle of fair market value is based on anticipation and the stability of the income stream and durability of it over time. So that's exactly what we're discussing here. These expirations matter. And additionally, the NOI is expected to drop with this increased vacancy. So we do agree that it should be lower than what was reported in 23. I'd like to point out, if we use a conservative 25% vacancy on the test column, and don't make any below the line deductions, the value comes out to around $84.9 million, which we believe would be a reasonable conclusion to reach here. Again, given that 21% confirmed vacancy, 2025 expirations, top floor posted for sublease. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Just among the board, I did two things. I see Jose's doing some numbers here. One, I think the rents that they used on the original assessment are more in line with what it's doing. I don't really like on the test that they bumped it up, just to get a higher number. I think sometimes that happens a lot. So I tend to like the original assessment, but I think the expenses are low. So I increased the expenses to $9 a square foot, which is $3,042,000, which is less than what they used in the test. That caps out at $88,657,900. Then, I got concerned about this below the line deduction. And the answer to say I didn't do it, I don't know. I can't explain why it wasn't done. That doesn't really sit well with me. But if in the test it says, below the line is a $2.3 million deduction, and they're using the same square footage, on vacancy, my feeling is deduct that from the original. That's a mistake. That it would be deducted from that original 91. That comes out at 89.6, call it. So I'm somewhere between 88 and 89. But what if you did some math?
So you buy it below the line, even though at 1124 it was 13% vacant.
Well, I did.
Slide
One
18.
of them I did, and one I didn't. So kind of test each other out. But
I didn't understand, and you could help, I hope. I said go below the line in office buildings when it's over 28%. And Mr. Cheekas, he might have done a great job. I just didn't understand his explanation. Why are we going below the line when, again, it's 13, but they're writing off 18, and then going, this is now on the test column. We see this a couple of times a week, more than a couple of times a week. And that's why I'm finding this analysis challenging for me.
I agree. I didn't really understand where the line deduction came. I did take a look at column D. The office rent was $33.50, and the vacant office space was $37.50.
Yeah, and the original that
tripped me up.
I was going to bring it up.
So I adjusted the vacant office to $33.50 because the appellant seems to agree with that as well. And after doing all the calculations, I came out at $89,802,600.
This is in column D.
All I did was change.
So the result is pretty much the same. I like the.
I don't think it shows that it's drastic thing that's happening with it. But I think the expenses should be adjusted.
In D. Still in D. Yeah.
yeah. So did you get the 88?
800.
900?
Did you go below the line as well to get that?
Yeah.
Just the expenses. Yeah, and we ought to mention once again though on the proposed and probable vacancies during the ensuing year, this year.
Yeah,
That
that'll be effective this year.
it's not possible for us in the department to project whether there's going to be any net absorption or not. And if there is, then God bless the property owners doing well. If not, then we'll write it off next year. I didn't find this appellant and other appellants' argument in that regard compelling, but I just wanted to make this statement.
Okay, then I'm going to move to reduce the assessment to $88,657,900 based on increasing the expenses to $9 a square foot on the original assessment.
And that's it.
Mr.
That's great.
Penaranda will second. All in favor?
That's great.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. The assessment's reduced to $88,657,900 based on increasing expenses to $9 a square foot on the original assessment. Next case is RPC 1405940 at 4300 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Yanani, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Thank you. Armin Yanoni, the owner of Rhino LLC. The subject, I'm getting a little bit of echo, I'm sorry, but from the BOE room, but sorry.
Better?
It's a Class A office built in 2003. It's on the corner of Wilson and Glebe in Boston. The property was 36% vacant as of the date of valuation, with another 70,000 square feet expiring in 2025, which totals 27% of the total NRA in addition to the 36. The major assessment flaws for this property, and I will point the board to the test sheet on the BOE memo on page 3 of 188. The major flaw is that both the original assessment and the test column are projecting an over $1 million increase to the 2023 NOI, ignoring significant lease expirations and using above market rents, making no adjustment for those expirations over time. Projecting this above actual and above market income stream into perpetuity via the direct cap results in an inflated value. And additionally, you will see on column F versus D, despite submitting significant evidence to support lower rents, the county actually increased their rents on the revision. I'd like to point the board to the appellant documentation, specifically the lease deal on page, sorry about that. I have it's page 38 of the appellant documentation and actually 38 of the BOE memo as well. An example of a lease deal that the owner was looking at where, yes, the face rents are looking around $47 a foot. However, this specific tenant was demanding a year of free rent and $105 for tenant improvement allowance, which comes out to a net effective rent in the $20 per square foot, whether or not you take the present value or not, which indicates, again, a significant discount to the long-term earning potential of this property. And again, a lot of the space of this property is vacant. So I've also included a peer properties report on page 131 of 188. And this shows from CoStar on the underwriting report, direct asking rents for this subject property of about $41 a foot. There's 17 comparable properties here, some directly in the vicinity, a couple further out in Courthouse, but you'll see, consistently that, these asking rents are much lower than what the county is assuming. And it was kind of shocking to us to see, the office rents increased on appeal as well as the NOI increased on appeal in the test column when the reported NOI, again, was over $1 million less. And not to mention the biggest tenant in the building on the top 3 floors expiring in 2025, and they're sure to use their leverage based on the current market to get significant concessions on their renewal, especially in a property like this that, is not recently renovated, and they're going to need, they're going to demand improvements to the property one way or another. I think this leads to a good example of, the recent sale of 2 Liberty, which was about 50% vacant at sale. If this tenant were to leave, this property would be in a similar position. That property sold for $146 a foot at a 9 cap. And, the assessment we're talking about today is much higher at, sorry, just a second. In the high 200 and in the revision, low 300s per square foot, which is just not in the realm of what, is actually indicated by the market. I'd like to point out that if we were to capitalize the 2023 net operating income at the county's cap rate, the indicated value would be roughly $66 million after deducting the $2.1 million in tenant improvement and leasing commissions spent in 2023 to retain tenants. Additionally, there's a significant CapEx budget for this property of $6 million that a buyer would account for. Whether that is through adding reserves, increasing the cap rate, or deducting it below the line, it is an immediate spend that this property is going to have to account for. And so as a result, we would appreciate the board's consideration in an adjustment in light of those issues. Again, the property has significant 36% vacancy, and the top 3 floors with an expiration within 18 months of the date of valuation, which a buyer would consider as of the date of valuation as a risk. They may not apply 100% weight to that scenario, but they are going to apply weight to that scenario. Buyers don't look just 1 year into the future. They're looking at a stabilized income assumption, and it's going to be handicapped at this property given the market and given the situation. Again, I know we've discussed at length our issue with the cap rates. And again, we would just like to point to the sale of 1201 Wilson, which was an 8 cap, 1776 Wilson, which was a 7.4 cap, to Liberty, which was a 9 cap. Ballston 1 sold at a 21 cap, not far from here, which again, the property was 38% vacant at sale with a big expiration coming up. That's a very similar situation to this property, albeit this property is at a slightly better location, which is why we're not asking for $100 a foot. We're asking for roughly $200 a foot after CapEx adjustments. So, we'd really appreciate the board's consideration again of those CapEx issues, of the upcoming vacancy, of the actual net operating income, which is far below what the county is assuming. And it's just kind of staggering to the appellant to see, on revision that the NOI would be increased when the actual T12 is so much lower. It doesn't accurately reflect how a buyer would price this property in the market and how they would account for the risk. They would clearly put a cap rate, increase on this compared to some other properties in the market, especially if we're basing our cap rate off of a 6.35 base, which is, frankly, not supported in the market, unless we're using the Microsoft building sale, which is not comparable to really very few, offices in the market. So again, our requested value is roughly 51 million or 200 a foot, which is much higher than, the two comparable sales within a mile of the subject. And additionally, if we cap out actual income at the county's cap rate, which is far too low, the indicated value is still 66.4 million. So there's definitely some room for adjustments here, and we would appreciate, the board's consideration. And again, mainly the cap rate seems to be the remaining issue on the test column, although we really don't agree with the increase to the rents that were applied by the county, as well as there was some rounding of the other income, which we're not sure where that came from when, remember, there's no vacancy deduction applied to the other income. So if we're assuming an increase to that income based on stabilized assumptions, we should probably be deducting the vacancy and collection loss of that as well, because that is not supported by the T12, which what we understood was typically used, on review. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. So again, as the board knows, we rely primarily upon the summary sheets. And looking at the summary sheet, again, as the appellant agent spoke about, there is some, let's say, confusion as far as why the county would be above what was reported for column E, operating year 2023, when in fact we all know that that's the actuals reported, not gross potential. So the actuals reported are a bit below what's projected by the county in column D, but that's again because we're using gross up as opposed to actuals. If you look at column E, you'll see that they don't mention any vacant space at all. They don't mention any vacant retail at all. In their pro formas, they do. Some $3.5 million of projected gross. So again, it makes more sense when you look at it as far as a gross versus actuals, which again, the board has heard throughout this entire year. When looking at the gross potential as compared to what was leased up the actuals reported in column E, you can see that based upon the rent roll in place, which is on page 5 of 191, we're actually a good bit lower than what's being achieved at the property, both for per square foot rates for retail, which is indicated under totals per square foot rate, as well as office space totals per square foot rate. Approximately $4 less than our original assessment, and almost $8 less $3 less for retail, as opposed to what's actually being achieved. You can see that as well in the column E. In this case, as was asked in the last case, the numbers that are presented there as far as a per square foot rate indicated in column E is essentially just math. You're taking that number reported for actuals received for office divided by the space occupied, NLA, and you get a dollar per square foot rate, per square foot rate that's over almost $1.20 more than what was projected by the county. Same thing for retail, again, almost a full $1.14 over what was projected by the county. In regards to operating expenses, again, this is actually an occasion where we over-projected on operating expenses, even allowing for growth year over year. As you can see as well, in regards to our test, we essentially took those numbers and used them, not as has been suggested, just to grow the gross as opposed to what's actually being achieved. Again, look at the rent roll in place, look at the per square foot rates across the board, top to bottom. They're all, I believe I can state, 80+%, 90% of the tenants are paying well more than what the county projected for a per square foot rate in column D. Unlike the last case, as far as, again, anticipation and expectation in years to come, we're an annual assessment. We're looking at each property annually. As far as this date evaluation, there looks like there's only one tenant, has approximately 3 or 4% of the NLA that was expected to leave. And again, that's an expectation. We don't know what happens as far as when the lease end comes, if there's renewals, if there's signups, and that's why we don't try to anticipate more than what we know. So as far as for January 1st, we can see that that tenant was actually supposed to stay through the end of this year, November 30th. The primary tenants are actually in place through next summer, through 2029, through 2033. Those are the largest tenants in place. Based upon the actuals reported in column E versus our gross potential reported in column D, we do believe that our per square foot rates are supportable. We do believe that our valuation is supportable. And again, we would note that this is a year-over-year decrease by almost 17%, again, fully accounting for the market. Much more in line with the performance of the property as opposed to the appellant's request for a negative 43% drop in value year over year. Again, it would be, we believe, inappropriate to anticipate too much into the future, given that we're an annual assessment and we have annual rent rolls to support our position. That being said, we do believe the county should be confirmed at a value of $74,733,000. Thank you.
Thank you both. Questions from board members? Okay, Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for the county, I'm just wondering, can you explain the below the line deduction? $6,128,000.
Okay, and before we start, I'm going to interject. Mr. Chicas, when did it start? I don't know who took it upon themselves that we don't break that out anymore. It's just a big number.
I don't know as far as the policy for the department. We can definitively break that out. Otherwise, I can verbalize it for you here.
Well, I can tell you for 20 years it's been broken out. So I don't know who's taken it upon themselves that lumping it all into one number works. It does not work for the board. So moving forward, that needs to be corrected on the cases.
We'll revise that moving forward. It is on page 181 of the worksheet for the county. You can see it listed as rent loss of 43,155 square feet. TIs at $90 square foot and leasing commissions. I can break down the individual numbers if you prefer.
Do you mind doing that, please?
Not at all. So rent loss of $1,726,200. TI commissions of $3,884,000. And leasing commissions of $517,900.
Thank you.
Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, is it just me? I'm having a vibration. And I heard it from Chris.
We're getting a lot of feedback in the room.
Yeah, Chris's volume is very low, so we have to keep turning it up here. That could be part of the issue.
Yeah.
Chris, can you turn your volume up on your computer possibly?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I still vibrating? Yeah.
Hold on a second. Hold on. Chris, can you talk now? Let's hear.
Yes, ma'am. Is this better?
Better, and we can read you. Okay, Mr. Lawson.
How about now for me?
Fine.
Oh, Chris, I have a question. If you're going to gross up, and we've seen some vacant space being leased, but we've been seeing more space being vacated. if you're going to gross up, why wouldn't you also gross down?
Explain further, sir.
Well, you're assuming in column in your test, you're assuming that we have a vibrant leasing market and that all this vacant space is going to get leased. When instead of what's happening out there is space being leased is being vacated.
Yeah, generally speaking, as far as if we're looking at potential value, we're not going to assume or anticipate that there will be losses in place. That's the point of grossing up, is that we actually look for potential gross potential income. So what is the net leasable area? What is the market rates? Which is what's done not only in the January 1st, but in the test as well. You can see the per square foot rate supported. You can see that there's a 28%.
I understand that, but that's not what's happening.
So again, what we do is we reflect what is in the marketplace. If this building had come to us after January 1 and said that in fact the rent roll did not support a flattening of their NLA, or in fact show that there were spaces that were gone after our data valuation, we would make an adjustment. That's the point of our grid, that it allows for excess vacancy beyond 28%. In this case, that was not achieved.
Well, the lenders, I mean, every lender that I'm familiar with, commercial lender, are assuming that any lease that expires within a year is going to be vacated. And so they're not, I mean, they're not looking at empty space getting leased. They're looking at rented space being vacated. And so I think, I guess what I'm saying is I object to taking the operating year and then grossing it up. I think the actual operating expenses ought to be what actually occurred, not redoing it and adding rent to it and so forth. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any final questions? Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yeah, I think just to address that last comment, if you're looking at the property as far as that being concerned, then you would absolutely want to just capitalize the column E, because again, that anticipates no growth whatsoever and it does not account for vacant space. We think that's inappropriate when you're looking at gross potential for the property. There is, as acknowledged in all columns, E, F, and G, both the owner themselves, the county in their test, and the appellant in their pro forma, all suggest that the building is 36% vacant. And yet only the county and the appellant account for that vacant space vis-a-vis what would be projected for market rents in the area. So to assume that the value is only based upon what they actually achieved, but not what they could achieve, I think would sort of handicap the county as far as what is the prospective gross potential for the property. It's in its name, gross potential. If we're only looking at actuals, then yes, we would agree. Okay. That being said, we do believe that the county.
Thank you. Mr. Iannone, you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate, the questions from the board, because it does kind of confuse the appellant, because on one hand, the county says, well, they can't speculate, if the biggest and highest paying tenant on the top 3 floors is leaving in 18 months, well, we can't speculate, we'll address that last year. But then concurrently, we see a $1 million NOI increase projection 1 year into the future. And the question is, well, what tenants are filling that space? What concessions are required? How much is it going to cost to get in there? And more importantly, when are they filling that space? Next year, in 2 years, in 5 years? So, it seems to be kind of going both ways against the appellant, in the sense that, we can't speculate a tenant leaving, which is the normal in the market, but also we're speculating $1 million increase to the NOI in year 1. My question would be, well, where's that $1 million coming from? What tenants are leasing the space? Where's the demand coming from? And I would reiterate, with this tenant leaving, this property is on the verge of being in a very similar situation to 2 Liberty and Boston 1, which both sold for less than $150 a foot. And meanwhile, the current assessment is pushing $300 a foot. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, it's just among the board.
Damn.
All right, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'll start off. What I did is I took the appellant's figure, 5,517,287 for the NOI, applied the county cap rate, did the below the line deduction, and ended up at 66,200,000 $948,500. And I think that's that might be a doable increase in rent. I doubt that they'll increase that much. In fact, they'll probably go the other way. But if we're going to look at potential, I think that's a reasonable, increase in the rent. I think jacking it up by $1 million is just doesn't make any sense. That's just my thinking.
I'll tell you what I did. I look at this and again, I don't get the difference on the test, but I just took the original assessment and increased the expenses to 9.5, which it ends up at 2.4 million, which is less than both the appellate and what the county used. Ends up with an NOI at 5.9. It caps out 79 when you do the below the line adjustment. That's lump sum at the 6.1 million at 72,927,900.
71 million.
72 million.
It deserved.
We don't really see a justification to do the expenses in this one. I think the expenses that the county used are above what they had in previous years. And the only thing I was thinking of doing is just using the income from the pro forma from the appellant, but it's not $1 million. It's about $500,000 that it's increasing in the gross potential income. But I think the below the line deductions that the county used are more justifiable to adjust for all that. So I'm okay with the original assessment.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Penaranda. What I did is I plugged in, of course, in column E, they're missing vacant office, vacant retail. So I plugged in the column G, appellant's pro forma numbers in there, and the county's still lower on GPI, and they're higher on expenses. So I would be okay with the assessment.
I didn't care for the GPI in the test column either, and I think I erred. So I applied all the test column, but using the GPI from the appellant's column G. But I think that's too rosy or too negative. I erred in that. That was too low a evaluation because this is a fairly steady state building. I mean, it's not doing great, but it does what it does every single year. So I came back to saying, well, okay, then the valuation's okay because it's 16.5% reduction, which doesn't account for a lack of value in the property, but rather in the marketplace. And this is what we're seeing, 15 to 20%. To shave off a little, I kind of like your approach because it shaves off a little bit because this is such a chronically, if not poorly, not very productive. But you're right. That's not the way to do it because the cost, the OPEX is fine in the original. So unless absent some other more defensible approach to reducing it marginally, I would support what's there now.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and move that we confirm the assessment at 74,733,000 even.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Metzger, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? It is 4-1. Now, Mr. Lawson, the county's confirmed at 74,733,000 even.
Let me add something as we've heard this before. It's generally very briefly. Making assessments based on what lenders would do, were highly risk averse and never look beyond the first or second payment. I think it's in error.
All right, the last case on the agenda is RPC 14041-013 at 3865 Lisson Boulevard. Mr. Iannone, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Thank you. So the subject property is another Class A office building located in the Ballston submarket. This property was built in 2003. The test page for the county is on page 3 of 173, and I'll just quickly run through a few, facts about the property. So number one, the county, I'm sorry, the property was roughly 27.54% physically vacant as of the 1/1/24 date evaluation. However, on the test column, you'll see that the county dropped their vacancy from 28 to 18%. And the reason they did this is because, as you could see on the rent roll on page 5, is because there were a couple tenants, starting leases, later in 2024, one of which is the, restaurant on the ground floor, and then a couple other existing tenants that have leases starting in April of 2024. However, and as a result, if you look at those new leases starting, deduct that from the physical vacancy, you get a lower number. However, what the county failed to account for is that the tenants were downsizing significantly within this rent roll, and it's not reported. It's not reflected on the rent roll. However, it was confirmed at the start of the other leases. So, for example, if you look again on page 5 of 173, the tenant in unit 225 moved to suite 500, which is a significant downsize from their previous lease. And then as of their beginning of the lease on April 1st, they have since vacated the second floor, which is now entirely vacant. Additionally, the tenant on the top floor in suite 800, which had 17,105 square feet, did downsize to 6,800 square feet. So over 10,000 square feet becoming vacant. So basically what's happening here in the test column is the county is saying, okay, well, we have some new leases starting, so I'm going to decrease the vacancy. However, what they didn't account for is the space becoming vacant concurrent with those lease starts because of downsizing of current tenants. So no matter how you look at it, you could look at it reflecting the physical vacancy as of 1/1, or you could look at it reflecting the expected vacancy as of 1/1 within the calendar year. No matter how you look at it, the property is 28% or more vacant. If we actually, if we take the county's revised occupancy and remove the downsized tenants, the actual vacancy should be 31.74%, which would actually indicate an excess vacancy adjustment below the line in excess of the 28% vacancy. This is pretty significant. And this tells a story of the market, and specifically this building, which does have short-term lease rollover and short-term leases in general. This is a continuous project, to keep these tenants, retain them, move them around. For example, the 5th floor was built out as a spec suite to attract new tenants. And what ended up happening is they had to move existing tenants into there who were downsizing to keep them. And then additionally, we do have a 3rd floor, which is a total shell space, totally unimproved, which the county is not adjusting for. And there's no, leasing prospects for that. So to apply a gross potential income of that space of $36 a foot for the vacant office, but not make any significant adjustment for that is frankly incorrect. The market is going to look at that, consider the cost to build out the shell, which is roughly $2 million, just to get it into deliverable space, not to mention other concessions that may be required. So these are all significant issues that, that the county is failing to adjust for. And I believe, increasing that vacancy rate from 18 back to 28% would be, more accurate reflection of the situation at the subject property. And it's also, worth noting that with these expirations, and this continuous turnover, if you look at the net operating income, it is a healthy number. However, these expenses are not showing up in the T12. They're showing up as capital expenses year in, year out. For example, the property, if we go to the appellant documentation on page 35, you could see the property spent $1.9 million in tenant improvements and leasing commissions, and has an actual spend of $1.8 million of CapEx, which was for that 5th floor, build out, which is very significant. And this is a continuous thing that doesn't show up in the net operating income. However, a buyer, as of the date of valuation, is going to apply a discount for that, whether by the cap rate, the stabilized vacancy, a below the line deduction. They're not going to ignore it. They're not going to project this NOI into perpetuity without accounting for the continuous costs and lease turnover that account for it. And with reservation, I would like to mention that there are some sale efforts for this property. And what I can say is that, the brokers looking at this are 100% accounting for these costs. And what I can also say is I know we've discussed the cap rates ad nauseum, but the cap rates being proposed by the brokers are not even remotely in the realm of what the county is using and even what we're using. So, I would like to point that out. And I know this is something that will be an issue for next year, but, I would urge the board to consider the fact that, ownership would definitely be a seller at the proposed assessment. So, if you know anybody, that would be, that would be great for them. But more importantly, our value truly is a reflection of what they might expect to receive for the property, hopefully. So, I know it's an issue for next year, and I know, it's still speculative, and I'm not fully at liberty to discuss the specifics of it. But what I can say, there are sale efforts, and the county's cap rates are not in the realm. The brokers are accounting for these costs, the tenant turnover, the significant vacancy. And so we really would appreciate the board's consideration of these issues, despite the fact that I'm sure the county will point out that the net operating income at the property does show a story which is good, but that's only half of the story. The leasing situation is the full story, and the durability of that income stream is what the market prices, not just the existence of it in the T12. I would like to point out, if we were to take the county test column and bring that vacancy back to 28% as it should have remained, and quite honestly, there should be a below-the-line deduction there as well, not only for the excess vacancy, but also for the shell space and also for significant near-term lease turnover. But if we just fix that one input, which was mistakenly updated on the test column, the value comes out roughly around $37 million, which we think would be a much more reasonable, place to land. And I'd like to remind the board again of the sales basically next door that I've discussed of 2 Liberty, which sold for $147 a foot at a 9 cap. Boston 1, which sold for $104 a foot at a 21 cap. And again, this is a similar situation where, one floor vacating on this property has a cascading effect on the value, and it's almost impossible to refill that space, in this market. And again, we have a whole shell floor, a floor that's just dark shell, concrete. And we did inspect the property last year to confirm this, and it hasn't changed. There's no leasing prospects. The county's making no adjustment for this in their analysis. So no matter how you look at this, we think that the vacancy applied in the test column is incorrect, should be updated to 28%, and there should be additional consideration for the risk via the cap rate or a below-the-line deduction, again, for that CapEx, including the shell space, which is at least $2 million, and then, near-term rollover risk.
All right.
And again, our requested value is $33.8 million, which is much lower than the current assessment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Cheekins for the county.
Yes, ma'am. So to be clear, the rent roll is actually derived directly from the owner. The board can see this on page, I believe it's page 107, 152. You can see that they clearly talk about the start dates. And to be clear, it's a bit polar opposite, if you will, to the arguments made by the owner's agent in their first 2 cases, whereas talking about anticipation, and expectations. These were neither anticipations nor expectations, but actual leases in place. The county recognized them, as did the owner, and we believe that was appropriate. You can see, in fact, unfortunately, it wasn't included in the packet, but the Founders Bank, which took Suite 540, was advertising this as late as December of 2023. Carbonara has been talked about since 2022. In fact, their original move-in date was supposed to be last summer, and in fact, this year. And again, as the agent himself noted, the other tenant was already in place. They simply took other space. So we do believe that the adjustments made were appropriate. Again, this is reflective, as Mr. Inoue said, what an investor would look at as far as who's in place. Please note too that per our rent roll, which you can see, I believe, on page 3, we did not gross up that amount for the new tenants because, again, we realized that with them in place mid-year or early in the year, that they would not achieve full gross potential for income that would be expected. So you'll see the annualized rent for all three of those tenants, as highlighted in yellow, is quite a bit lower than what is to be projected based on a full year. When looking at the summary sheet, you can see that the county underprojected, while we overprojected gross potential, that's because we actually are grossing up the property as opposed to the actuals that are presented in column E. Even still, we underprojected effective gross, slightly underprojected OpEx by approximately 52,000, and underprojected operating net operating income. In fact, you can see that we're lower than what was achieved in 2022 as well. That being said, we did test the new information, given the new rent roll information provided by the owner. We do believe that given that this was not only expected, but already leased and contracted in place, that was appropriate. We did make adjustments for that. In fact, you can see that we grossed up operating expense projections to $10 a square foot, even actually above what was achieved by the or projected by the appellant. Please note as well that the appellant's gross potential is actually more than not only the county's original, it's more than what was achieved actuals vis-a-vis the 2023 operating statement, and more than our test. So again, I think that speaks to the actual potential at the property based on the income structure that's in place and the rents that are being achieved. Given all this, given our under projections for what was actually achieved at the property net operating income, given its location, this is again as well located as can be in regards to nestled next to Ballston Quarter, and 2 metro stops, etc. Given that even with this information, the original assessment actually calls for an almost 11% decline in value year over year. We do believe that the county should be confirmed at a value of $42,146,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for the county, in their test column, 18% was used. Was that a mistake or was that on purpose?
Mr. Mendez, if you could elaborate, sorry, you're talking about the physical vacancy?
The vacancy.
Vacancy and for the vacancy and concession, again, we follow the guideline, which speaks to those properties between 13 and 18% would get to the 18% level.
Okay. Mr. Matson.
Let me take a different spin on the exact same question for the appellant. What was the physical vacancy on 1124?
The physical vacancy on 1124 was 40,121 square feet, or 27.54% of the net rentable area.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I thought the vacancy was 17%.
Where did you see that?
I saw it somewhere, because that's why Chris used the 18%. Am I missing something?
Chris was considering the upcoming leases that were not started as the date of valuation as occupied. However, he was also not removing the spaces to be vacated. So he was adding space that was to be occupied, but then not removing the space to be vacated. If we take that approach, the actual vacancy is 32%.
What does Chris have to say about that?
Yeah, if we may speak to that again, I think that's the difference that we've sort of tried to hit home this case and the last two, is that we have expectations versus lease contracts. So while we may expect those tenants to leave, we do not know what they will do because, of course, that's in the future. What we do know is that they leased space of some 14,000 square feet, which the owner himself detailed in the rent roll supplied to the county.
Haven't we in the past not counted leases that were signed but weren't paying rent yet?
Well, in fact, what we did was to match that, as if you noted, and I spoke to that in your rent roll, you can see that while we account for them as far as physical occupancy, we don't count their revenue. We adjusted that down to account for the free rent period, et cetera.
I gotcha.
So
okay.
Their rent projection is nowhere near what they will be achieved.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, and just to confirm from both parties, Mr. Iannone, you're saying that as of 1/1/2024, the vacancy was 27.54%?
Yes, and I can point the board to the rent roll.
That's all right. That's all. And Mr. Chicas, what are you using as of 1/1/2024?
We are suggesting it's 25,313,000 square feet vacant, equating to approximately 17%.
And the difference is those tenants who have signed contracts but aren't paying.
Right.
That's the 14,000 plus difference between their two gross
Right.
numbers.
Yes.
So we have to decide what.
Okay, that'll be for discussion. All right. Any final questions? Okay, Mr. Chicas, take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. So and again, just to piggyback on Mr. Maitskin's question, these tenants are in fact paying in the year 2024. We're not counting that income to the gross potential to account for a free rent period, et cetera. So what we're essentially doing is marking that they are, as the owner agrees, leased contracted tenants who are responsible for payments at some point in the year, to include common areas, real estate tax, et cetera. So as the appellant's agent pointed out, as what an investor would look at, obviously they would include these tenants in place as opposed to what may or may not occur later in the year with tenants that may or may not leave. That being said, we do believe the value should be confirmed at $42,146,000, again, an 11% drop year over year. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Iannone, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Thank you. So we can look at this two ways. One way, physical vacancy 1/1/24, 27.54%. Or you can look at it as expected occupancy through the year. Now, while you do have one retail tenant moving in, you also have one tenant significantly downsizing. If again, on the rent roll, the county's rent roll on page 5 of 186, the tenant in unit 225 moved into 500 and vacated 225. So if we're going to consider unit 500 occupied, we need to consider 225 vacant. No matter how you look at it, the property is either 28% or 32% vacant, and using an 18% stabilized vacancy is not appropriate. And these facts were known as a data valuation. The 500 tenant moving into the 5th floor was contingent on them leaving the 2nd floor. Additionally, it was known that the unit 800 downsized from 17,000 square feet to 6,800 square feet. So the county is accounting for upcoming leases that are occupying, but not accounting for confirmed expirations where the tenants were either downsizing or leaving. And not to mention, we have no discussion of the shelf space that is being unadjusted for on the 3rd floor with gross potential income being applied for it. At the very least, 20. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, it's just among the board. I would disagree with the appellant on this last that the county's disregarding because they're not asking to take the test. I mean, so in the original assessment, they're giving them the 28%.
Yeah.
So that's a new point. I'm not sure why we spent time listening to the argument on that. So
that's their job.
Right, but they're giving them what they want. So waste of time. I mean, I look at the NOI on the original assessment. I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in the test. I think it's overstated. I think they pump it up to take it back down again. So that to me comes right off the board. But I look at the original assessment and you look at the NOI. I mean, it's lower than what the appellant is asking, lower than what the operating year has, not taken into account any dollar amount for vacant square footage. So I'm having a tough time not being okay with the county's assessment.
Yeah, I'm okay with it also. I mean, this assessment has been going down for the past 10 years, really. It used to be like in 64, 60 premium range. And I think the county justified with the original assessment at 28%. I think that's a good number. So I'm okay with it.
Mr. Lawson?
Yes, I'm okay with the assessment as well. And what I wanted, hasn't kind of our policy as a board been that when a lease is going to expire, we don't consider it that it's going to vacate unless we've seen a signed lease somewhere else. I remember a lot of discussion about that in the past. So I think, a tenant could always remain, but lower the rent some. They may leave, they may go some. And so I think that's part of the justification of not necessarily assuming someone whose lease will expire soon is going to leave. A percentage of them probably will. But anyhow, I'm good with the original assessment.
Mr. Metzger.
Let me add on to that a little twist on this tenants who are proposed to leave during the year. Even those tenants who have signed leases elsewhere, we know they're going to leave. What we don't know is whether their space is going to be released, and we don't know what the TI is going to be, and the brokers' commissions are going to be. And I misspoke in the last case. I want to clean that up quickly. But in this same tenor, that proposed buyers, proposed lenders would take all this stuff into account. It's anticipatory, but they're locked in for a long time. Lenders about 8 years, buyers for however long it is they're going to own the property. But the county has the ability to change it year after year after year, and that's why I think we've adopted this position over the decades that you guys have been on the board and the decade and a half I've been on the board. So I support what we're doing. Finally, on this tenants that have signed leases as of 1/1 but haven't moved in, is that space vacant or not? And the answer is it's not vacant. It's not available for lease. Somebody has it. And so the 18% vacancy that the department put in is perfectly appropriate. So therefore, as far as I'm concerned, the column D original is probably overly generous to the tenant, to the property owner. And but we're not going up in valuation anytime, so I got to support it as well.
That being said, I will move to confirm the county at 42,146,000 even. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Metzger, a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Right, it's unanimous. County's confirmed at 42,146,000 even. That completes the agenda. Thank you. Anybody have any other business? All right, then we
Good
will.
day.
Thank you, sir.
We'll stand adjourned at 10:29. Reconvene next Tuesday morning, October 15th, virtual for the board members. For everyone at 9 a.m. Thank you, everyone.